This is not a story you will find inside history books or official military records. No nation admits it happened, and no government has ever accepted responsibility. Yet this war existed, and it silently reshaped global power without public awareness. What you are about to hear was erased deliberately, line by line, from history. Welcome to BattleCore Stories. The war began in a place that officially did not exist on any recognized world map. It was a stretch of land hidden between two rival nations with long-standing tensions. No borders were marked, and no civilians were allowed to remain anywhere nearby. Only mountains, thick fog, surveillance drones, and soldiers trained to disappear completely. Every soldier deployed there signed a document denying their existence under all circumstances. If captured, injured, or killed, their country would officially deny knowing them. No medals would be awarded, and no funerals would ever be held publicly. Only silence would follow their disappearance, protected by classified agreements. The reason for secrecy was simple but terrifyingly effective in preventing global escalation. Admitting conflict would violate treaties and trigger international sanctions immediately. It could also spark a larger war involving allies on both sides. So both governments chose secrecy instead of peace or honesty. They did not agree to stop fighting, only to hide it completely. The first act of this secret war was not an explosion or a gunshot. It began with a reconnaissance unit that crossed into the unmarked zone one night. Their mission was simple, routine, and officially logged as a training exercise. They never returned, and no distress signal was ever recorded. By morning, the unit had vanished without leaving a single trace behind. No bodies were found, and no communication devices were recovered. Just silence where voices once existed. Instead of public announcements, a classified response was quietly initiated overnight. A special task force was activated under a code name known to very few. Task Group Black was deployed without insignias, serial numbers, or national identifiers. They were trained for operations that governments could never admit publicly. Their orders were clear: locate the missing unit and neutralize any opposition. Opposition was never defined as an enemy or a specific country. It was simply referred to as the other side. Operations were conducted strictly at night, to avoid satellites and civilian detection. Weapons used were untraceable and designed to leave minimal forensic evidence. Bodies were removed before sunrise, and terrain was carefully restored afterward. By daylight, the battlefield looked untouched, as if nothing had ever happened. This routine repeated night after night without any public acknowledgement. The enemy soldiers wore similar equipment and followed nearly identical tactics. They spoke no language that could be identified or traced reliably. They also removed their dead and wounded before retreating into darkness. It was a mirror war, fought by reflections of the same methods. No one knew who fired the first shot, and no one could prove anything. The first confirmed clash lasted less than 5 minutes in total darkness. Thermal scopes detected movement, followed by suppressed gunfire and sudden silence. When the fighting ended, 3 soldiers were missing and 2 were dead. The wounded survivor was evacuated quietly before dawn with strict medical secrecy. The dead soldiers were never officially recorded as casualties. Their families would never be told where they truly died. As days turned into weeks, the secret war intensified without any visible signs. Ambush became more frequent, and missions grew increasingly dangerous. Despite this, both governments publicly spoke of cooperation and diplomatic stability. News channels reported trade talks while soldiers killed each other silently nearby. The contrast between public peace and private war became unbearable for some. One soldier, identified only as Eco 7, began documenting everything secretly. He knew writing anything down violated operational security protocols, but he feared the truth would disappear forever if no record survived. Eco 7 wrote about fear, confusion, and enemies who looked exactly like allies. He described nights filled with silence broken only by suppressed gunfire. He also wrote names, dates, and coordinates, knowing this could get him killed. Civilians living far from the zone began reporting strange nighttime disturbances. Low explosions echoed through valleys, shaking windows briefly before stopping. Authorities dismissed these reports as minor seismic activity or equipment testing. The explanation was accepted, and the world continued without questioning further. One night, a firefight lasted too long and became impossible to hide completely. Explosions lit the sky, and gunfire echoed louder than usual across mountains. By morning, investigators removed all evidence before any satellites passed overhead. The official statement blamed unusual geological movement detected by sensors. No media outlet challenged the explanation publicly. Soon after, a classified message reached Task Group Black commanders simultaneously. The order was brief, cold, and absolute in its intent. The operation would end immediately and all evidence must be erased. No winners would be acknowledged and no witnesses could remain. This war would conclude not with peace but with deletion. Echo 7 realized then that survival no longer depended on fighting skill. It depended on avoiding erasure by his own side. And the most dangerous phase of the secret war had just begun. The classified shutdown order changed everything inside the unmarked war zone. Missions were canceled, but soldiers were not immediately extracted from the area. Instead, communication became limited, delayed, and heavily monitored by command. No one explained why evacuation timelines suddenly kept changing without reason. Task Group Black commanders received a secondary directive marked Eyes Only. It stated that operational secrecy now outweighed individual soldier survival. Any risk of exposure would be neutralized permanently, without exception. The meaning was clear, even if never spoken aloud directly. Some soldiers would not be coming home. Eco 7 noticed behavioral changes among higher-ranking operatives almost immediately. Orders became vague, routes changed unexpectedly, and backup units stopped responding. Extraction helicopters missed rendezvous points without providing any explanation. Trust within the unit began to collapse under silent suspicion. Night operations continued, but objectives felt different and disturbingly incomplete. Targets were no longer enemy positions, but abandoned friendly checkpoints. Supply caches were destroyed, and communication relays were deliberately dismantled. It felt like someone was erasing the war backwards step by step. During one mission, Eco 7 discovered classified tags on fallen soldiers. They belonged to his own allied forces, not the enemy. Their weapons had been collected and bodies positioned to suggest enemy involvement. The realization hit harder than any firefight he had survived before. The cleanup had begun. Command labeled these actions as containment operations within internal briefings. Containment meant eliminating anything that could later contradict official denial. That included equipment, data, locations, and sometimes living witnesses. Soldiers had unknowingly become liabilities to be resolved quietly. Eco 7 secretly warned several teammates, but paranoia already ruled their minds. Some refused to believe command would ever sacrifice its own soldiers. Others prepared to disappear rather than trust extraction promises. Friendships fractured under fear, silence, and uncertainty. One squad attempted unauthorized evacuation using a pre-war supply route. They were intercepted by an unit wearing identical equipment and gear. The engagement lasted less than 4 minutes before complete radio silence followed. No official report was ever filed regarding that squad's disappearance. Their names were removed from internal rosters the following day. The enemy was no longer clearly defined as a foreign force. It was now anyone standing in the way of complete historical erasure. The battlefield had turned inward, consuming its own participants. Secrecy demanded absolute obedience even against fellow soldiers. Eco 7 recorded everything in his encrypted diary despite extreme personal risk. He described betrayal, moral collapse, and fear of being hunted by allies. Each entry ended with coordinates and timestamps for future verification. He knew the diary itself was a death sentence if discovered, but silence felt worse than execution. Extraction orders finally arrived, listing selected personnel approved for evacuation. Several familiar names were missing, including Eco 7's closest teammates. Those missing were reassigned to final sweep operations near the border. Eco 7 understood what that assignment truly meant. The final sweep teams entered regions with no planned exit routes. Their communications went dark within hours of deployment. Satellite logs showed brief heat signatures, then nothing at all. Officially, those areas never hosted any military activity. Eco-7 refused to board the extraction aircraft when his name was called. Instead, he slipped away during a controlled distraction near the landing zone. He destroyed his equipment, removed identifying markers, and vanished into terrain. Becoming invisible was now his only chance at survival. The war officially ended that same night without public acknowledgment. Governments issued statements praising diplomacy and conflict avoidance efforts. International media celebrated stability while soldiers disappeared quietly. Markets opened normally the following morning without interruption. Families received notifications weeks later with carefully scripted explanations. Training accidents, transportation failures, or natural causes were cited repeatedly. No locations were provided, and questions were discouraged immediately. Compensation packages arrived alongside strict non-disclosure agreements. Grief was permitted, curiosity was not. Eco-7 lived off-grid, constantly moving through isolated regions. He avoided technology, cities, and anyone who asked questions. He understood the cleanup phase could last years if necessary. Those responsible did not operate on timelines, only objectives. Months later, an independent journalist noticed irregular satellite gaps near the region. Thermal anomalies matched military-grade equipment signatures during blackout periods. The journalist began assembling a report connecting unexplained disappearances. Sources initially cooperated, then suddenly stopped responding entirely. The article was never published. Funding disappeared, editors backed out, and digital files were erased remotely. The story was labeled speculative fiction before reaching public attention. Another potential truth was buried successfully. Eco-7 realized official channels would never allow this war to surface. If the truth survived, it would need to escape traditional systems entirely. History would not record this conflict unless forced to acknowledge it. And Eco-7 decided silence would no longer be his shield. The world moved on quickly, unaware that a war had ended silently overnight. News channels discussed markets, elections, and weather without mentioning any conflict. Officially, no soldiers had deployed, and no operations had ever taken place. The secret war was complete, sealed behind classified walls of denial. Eco-7 survived by staying invisible, blending into regions forgotten by modern systems. He avoided digital footprints, medical records, and any form of official identification. Trusting anyone became impossible after witnessing systematic betrayal firsthand. Survival required constant movement and absolute silence. Behind closed doors, government cleanup teams finalized historical erasure procedures. Mission logs were deleted, satellite imagery archived under permanent classification seals. Personnel files were altered to remove deployment references completely. Names were rewritten, ranks dissolved, and service records quietly amended. Families were given closure without truth, wrapped carefully in patriotic language. Folded flags were delivered for soldiers who officially never left home. Wives received compensation checks paired with legal silence agreements. Children grew up hearing vague stories about honorable service without details. Years passed, and the secret war faded into obscurity successfully. But small inconsistencies remained buried within forgotten data archives. Eco-7 knew these fragments could still prove everything if assembled correctly. The truth was broken, not destroyed. Using unsecured public networks, Eco-7 began releasing encrypted data fragments. He avoided major platforms, choosing decentralized servers instead. Coordinates, timestamps, call signs, and operational patterns surfaced slowly. Each fragment alone seemed meaningless, but together revealed undeniable structure. Authorities responded swiftly but carefully to avoid drawing public attention. The leaked files were labeled fictional scenarios and dismissed as creative writing. Algorithms suppressed visibility, and search results buried related discussions. Official experts publicly laughed off the claims as conspiracy theories. Unexpectedly, something went wrong with the suppression strategy. Veterans began quietly recognizing details they were never supposed to see. They noticed correct formation tactics, accurate terrain descriptions, and precise timing. These were details no outsider could fabricate convincingly. They did not confirm publicly, but subtle acknowledgments appeared everywhere. Anonymous comments, coded phrases, and quiet nods replaced direct statements. The truth spread silently among those who already understood war intimately. Recognition without exposure became its own form of resistance. Eco-7 released his final diary entry as a recorded audio file. His voice was calm, controlled, and free from fear or anger. He explained why some wars must remain secret to prevent global catastrophe. But he also explained why silence destroys the soldiers who fight them. He stated that secrecy protected governments, not the people sent to die. He spoke about moral compromise, forgotten sacrifice, and erased humanity. Then he ended the recording with a warning, not a confession. Truth does not disappear simply because history refuses to write it. Within hours, the recording spread beyond initial containment efforts. Attempts to remove it only increased curiosity and sharing behavior. Suppressing information once again proved less effective than expected. The internet remembered what governments tried to forget. Eco-7 disappeared shortly after releasing the final file. No body was found and no arrest was ever reported publicly. Intelligence agencies quietly closed the case without resolution. Another ghost was added to the unacknowledged casualty list. Years later, partially declassified documents emerged under international transparency laws. They referenced unacknowledged operations and zero-record casualty events. Locations were redacted, names removed, and timelines fragmented intentionally. But patterns matched Eco-7's released fragments perfectly. Historians debated quietly while officials maintained consistent denials. The war remained unofficial, but doubt had permanently entered public consciousness. Once doubt exists, complete erasure becomes impossible. History had cracked, even if it refused to open fully. The secret war achieved its purpose without triggering global escalation. But its cost was paid entirely by nameless soldiers. They fought without recognition and died without remembrance. Stability was purchased through deliberate historical amnesia. Some wars are remembered through monuments, medals, and national holidays. Others exist only in classified files and buried memories. The most dangerous wars are not the ones history records. They are the ones history chooses to forget. If this story ever disappears, that absence will confirm everything. Silence does not mean peace. Sometimes it means fear of truth. History is written by those who survive long enough to speak. Many soldiers never receive that chance. This was BattleCore Stories, where forgotten wars, erased soldiers, and buried truths are finally remembered.